This week, Ed Skoudis is with us to discuss The Code of Honor, Embracing Ethics in Cybersecurity, a new book that he co-authored that I'm very excited to talk about. In the security news, default credentials gone wild, tank gauge vulnerabilities, the forgotten Cisco gear, firmware updates, a love story, stealthy Linux malware, more print nightmares, the Comcast breach, reading your passwords out loud, and the NVD backlog. The saga continues. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. It's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
In 2024, the future of identity, security, and digital transformation converges at Octane, hosted by Okta. On October 15th through the 17th, join the brightest minds in tech and business in Las Vegas or online as they explore groundbreaking innovations and unveil the latest Okta solutions to keep your organization secure, connected, and ahead of the curve. Whether you're a developer, an IT or security leader, or a visionary, Octane is your gateway to transforming tomorrow today. Security Weekly listeners only need to pay $100 for your full conference pass for Octane by using the discount code OKTNSC24 at securityweekly.com/Octane 2024. You can also stream the event live on okta.com/Octane. Breachlock is a global leader in continuous attack surface discovery and penetration testing. Since Breachlock was founded, they are adding over 50 new customers every month. They have discovered over 1 million reported vulnerabilities and performed more than 20,000 pen testing engagements, including pen tests for over 15,000 web applications, 8,000 mobile apps, more than 100,000 APIs, over 10,000 cloud security audits, and over 200,000 network endpoints. They test your entire attack surface and help you mitigate your next cyber breach before it occurs. Know your risk. Contact Breachlock today. Visit securityweekly.com/Breachlock. Coming to you from Not Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself. This is Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 846, being recorded on Tuesday, October 8th. I'm Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Larry Pesce. Larry, welcome.
Hey, Paul. Yeah, we're on a weird schedule this week, so just like you, I couldn't be in studio this week.
That's right. It's all my fault. Mr. Lee Neely, as usual, is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here, remote or otherwise, and nice, happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Miss Mandy Logan is here with us. Mandy, welcome.
Why, thank you. It's extremely exciting to be here.
We have with us today one of my favorite guests and favorite people that we get to work with in the industry, Mr. Ed Skoudis. He is currently faculty at Einz Research, president at SANS Technology Institute, and the founder of CounterHack. Ed, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with such good friends again. I think I've been on the show something like 20 times in the last 19 years or something like that.
I think you and Mike Poor were like episode 3 or something like that.
I love being here with you guys. It's just a joy, and I love listening to the show. It's such a great thing for the community. So it's great to see you all again.
Yeah. So of course, Ed, when you told us that you had a new book coming out, I was intrigued. And we've talked about the concept and topic of ethics, of course, quite a bit on the show. I think we covered it a little bit with SPAF recently. And of course, when it comes to disclosure, right, that's a big topic that always like delves into ethics, whether that's vulnerability disclosure, breach disclosure. There's so many aspects. And I was like, well, so I wrote a book about all of this with a bunch of, basically case studies. And I'm like, this is great. This is a great thing for our industry because I think in so many different capacities, right, we come up to this like situation where we have to consider ethical behavior and think about what is ethical behavior. So Ed, I'll turn it to you because I know when you like write a book or a class or do something, there's usually like a story behind how all that got started.
Absolutely. So, I taught for SANS for over 21 years. And if you add up all the students that I taught, both face-to-face and virtual, the number comes to 40,000, which is
wow.
It's a little crazy. Yeah. And in 21 years teaching 40,000 students, you get some questions, oftentimes questions involving ethics. I mean, Larry can confirm this as a current SANS instructor. He knows.
I caught the slip on former there. I hope there's something better.
No, it's all good.
I would be the
It's
former.
all good.
I'm a former SANS instructor. Larry's a current one.
That's right. I was looking at Paul that I said former. So, and a lot of these questions that students would ask me are associated with ethics. Stuff like, I just passed my PCI audit, and I don't think we should have passed. What do I do? Or I discovered some zero-day flaw and the vendor won't listen to me. What do I do? Or, all these different questions of ethics. And, I've been sending answers and coaching students and helping them through things for 20 plus years. So that's kind of, the seed of it. And then I started working with this gentleman named Dr. Paul Maurer. He's the president of Montreat College. It's a college in North Carolina, actually about a half hour or so from Asheville. And he was talking with some folks at the NSA. Now, there's this thing called Centers for Academic Excellence. I don't know if you're familiar with it, CAE schools. It's over 400 colleges that the NSA has recognized as Centers for Academic Excellence. That is, you can go there and get trained up in good cybersecurity stuff. 400 of these schools. Montreat College is one of them. The SANS College, SANS Technology Institute College, of which I'm the president, is one of them. So the NSA approached Paul Maurer and said, hey, could you create a curriculum for us to teach cybersecurity ethics? This happened shortly after, maybe there were certain folks that were contractors for the NSA that may or may not have done things that made the NSA very unhappy. But we don't need to get into the details of those things. But they said, could you build us a curriculum? And Dr. Paul Maurer, who has his Master's of Divinity and a PhD in political science, said, we'll do you one better. We will create a book, but not just a textbook, but a book that can be used for professionals in the industry, but also used to teach CAE students a framework of cybersecurity ethics and decision-making in cybersecurity. So we produced this book. Again, it's not just a textbook. It's for anybody that does cybersecurity, from the CISO down to the SOC analyst, from a pen tester all the way to a DFIR expert and so forth. So we wrote this book, and then our publisher also had us create a curriculum for it as well. So this was, we did a lot of travel. We worked on the book for 2 years. We had this committee of reviewers and people giving us input. And all the travel and such was paid for by the NSA, because they're hoping this book will help the CAA schools and students. But perhaps, we hope, it might help the industry more generally to have this framework. So that's sort of the origin story of the book. And putting it together was quite an adventure over the space of 2 years.
I bet. It's interesting as you're describing that. I'm going through my head like various points in my career where there was an ethics discussion, right? And I think perhaps some of the earliest memories I have of that is when I went to work for a lottery company. And I was like, wow. And so there was this like hard and fast rule that anyone that lived in your house could not play the lottery. That was, the lottery systems that were produced by the company we worked for, right? I think that might have even extended to other similar lotteries, right? And what that like first experience for me was made me think about was, as security professionals, oftentimes we have high level privileges and access to things that others do not, so that we can do our jobs. For example, at that company, I could review all of the packets going in and out of the internet for that entire company, right? And that carried forward when I worked to the university. That was one of the other ethical things is, well, Paul can see everyone's traffic. How do we like validate that? How do we put some guidelines and rules, around that? So it's certainly, I think it's, when you start thinking about it, you're like, oh yeah, my career, there have been a lot of ethical things that we've had to deal with in situations.
It comes up all the time. It's the sort of Spider-Man rule: with great power comes great responsibility. And we in cybersecurity have great power. The access that we're given just to do our jobs, the information we have, the control we have over our environments. And the book, it's not like it goes over every single possible thing you may face. It is full of case studies. But the most important thing is it's a framework for thinking through things and decision making. We have various principles we put up front, ethical principles. We call this the cybersecurity code. And that's right up front, and you can read that and those principles. Then it's a bunch of reasons why those principles are important, how to apply those principles in your work and in your life. And then it's thoroughly full of case studies where we look at the interplay of those principles, because sometimes you got to prioritize some things over other things. But we have, these 8 foundational principles.
And so what's an example of like one of those principles, Ed?
So the first one, super important, I will treat all people with dignity and respect. So it's kind of, elevating, the human aspect of this thing to the top. You got to treat people with dignity and respect. The next principle, I will seek the best interest of others. In other words, you're not just focused on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to support the community, your coworkers, people around you. Another one, I will strive to recognize, take ownership, and appropriately communicate my mistakes. We all make mistakes. I want to communicate my mistakes and exercise patience toward others who make errors. You can see where that might come out there, right? There's a breach. An organization wants to know whether to disclose it to its customers or the public. Another one, I will not be a lone wolf, but will instead work collaboratively with my peers and superiors. And it goes on and on. The last one in our list is I will protect and respect the privacy of others. And also another interesting part of the origin story here is Dr. Maurer, my co-author. He would fly up here to New Jersey once a month for about a year and a half. And he'd come here for a day or two and we would debate. What we did is we took all of the various, ethics codes that were out there in cybersecurity, like the code for CISSP, the code for GIAC. All of these have codes of conduct or ethics codes. We looked at all of them and had some grad students and such kind of map them together so we could kind of see how they all compared and contrasted. They were very focused on the integrity of their own certification, as you might expect. They also had some other general principles we thought that were interesting. So we tried to kind of boil those down. We also looked at codes of ethics for other industries, right? Like the Hippocratic Oath, or the Geneva Conventions, or, for warfare. Hippocratic Oath, of course, being for medical. We looked at some of the things for lawyers and their ethics and tried to boil it all together into something we thought would really apply to cybersecurity professionals across the board. And we debated, we wrestled. Sometimes it felt like we were wrestling over these things. Yeah, he sat in that chair right over there.
Verbally wrestling.
Verbally
you did describe
wrestling.
That to me before. Yeah.
And some of these debates I won, and some of them I lost. But it was intellectual combat among friends, right? It wasn't checkers. It was like chess. And I'll tell you about one that I won and one that I lost. So the question is, what do we incorporate? We're trying to boil this down to maybe a dozen principles, maybe 10. If we can consolidate, we got them down to 8, right? But we didn't know going in if we could get it below 10 or, below 8 or whatever.
It's more work. Like you said, it was a year and a half. It's more work to distill it down into a shorter summary. Right?
Aren't these two things just the same way of saying something else? But then does something addition emerge from that and such? And how do we make this simple, applicable and such? And so here's one that I won. I insisted that I will protect and respect the privacy of others is a fundamental ethical principle for cybersecurity practitioners. And Dr. Maurer argued against that, saying, does it really matter? Is that just a culturally derived thing, or is that really a foundational ethical principle? And after me producing countless case studies and persuasive arguments, he conceded the point, saying, yes, privacy is a fundamental human right, and therefore we as cybersecurity professionals have an ethical principle to, within reason, support that, okay? It's not universal. Sometimes privacy has to be, violated for a greater good. For example, in law enforcement, things like that, right? So that was one that I won. We put privacy in here. Another one that I wanted in there was freedom. And I think we as cybersecurity professionals should work to enhance freedom of individuals, freedom of expression, freedom of ideas, freedom of movement, and so forth. And Dr. Maurer, Paul, said, I think you just think that because it's a cultural thing, and especially because you're an American. And if you go around the world, you will find that is not a universal ethical principle. And we debated and debated and debated. I won't say I conceded, but I will say it's not among our 8 foundational ethical principles in the book. So he won that argument. I still like the argument, but he won that one. So supporting liberty and freedom was not among our top ethical principles.
Ed, one area, and I'm curious, how the book would advise us on this situation, because I think many of us, I know specifically Larry and myself, right, have created tools or maybe created a technique based on tools that are available. And then we get to this juncture where we're like, do I want to tell the world about this? Or are people just going to use this for evil? But also, like, if I can do this, it means others can as well. So I want everyone to know. So early on, right, I came across an exploit and I gave it to some people, and some of those people used it for not very ethical things. And early on in my career, I was like, wow, I really have to think this through when I come up with something. And fast forward to today, I've got documentation on the Flipper Zero stuff that I'm like, this could just make it easy for people to create mayhem. And I don't know that I want to go, making it public. So I think that's one that many of us struggle with, like I said, from the beginning of my career to today.
It's a very tough thing, and that's why the book goes over many scenarios, but it also gives you a framework to think through it point by point. Who are you benefiting? Are you just benefiting yourself by putting this information out there?
Right. Am I doing it just for the fame and glory, right? That's
right.
the
If
wrong,
that's what it's all about,
right,
that's probably not so good. Does it benefit the community? Who does it hurt? And it goes through. And I'm not saying that everybody who reads the book will come to the same answer. I think that's impossible to write such a book unless the book just puts its thumb on the scale. But I do think people who read the book and follow the framework in it will go through similar thought processes that will let them explore the implications of what they're planning on doing.
Yeah, I love that.
So they can come to an informed decision, but they might be different decisions there, One of the things that I like to say, because, I've got the book here, right? And, sometimes I'll go to a conference or something, we'll pass out signed copies. And one of the things that I do for my friends, and I'd like to do this to you sometime, Paul, I'll say, hey, I wrote this book on cybersecurity ethics, and then I go to hand it to him, and I can think of no one more in need of a book like this than you. And sometimes I'll even autograph the book that way. Gosh, You really should read, especially you. I usually don't write for an audience of one, but in this case, Lee Neely, you
caught me.
Mandy, you had a question.
I do. I mean, I find ethics absolutely intriguing, and to me, it's a cornerstone of life, making choices day to day and everything that we build for and everything that we are looking to become as individuals, even aside from, a cybersecurity role. And I wanted to share a couple of things because, especially in what you were saying lastly, that I actually kind of came to cybersecurity because of a deep need for understanding how to quantify and integrate ethics into my entire being. Like I had massive injuries. I had to relearn how to breathe and talk and walk and move. And the way that I was trying to handle all of my sensory data, I actually came to that, okay, if I'm picking up this information from other people, and I'm talking just as a person, as I'm reading, emotions from them and stuff, I literally didn't have a framework for understanding where exactly do I end and they begin, and what was the appropriate way for understanding how to interact with what I was taking, basically what I would call now is like other people's open source data, right? But was coming from them as a person. And so along with a few other things, what happened was it came to me as like, well, I had heard of ethical hacking in probably 2004, 2005 for the first time. These injuries were 2012, so this is a few years later. And what came to mind was I go, well, I think if I kind of glommed onto cybersecurity, ethical hacking community with the good-hearted individuals and understand the principles behind how and why they are handling information privacy, people's entire entities online, if I understand how they're doing that with network security and all that, I think I can use that as like principles and framework for understanding how I want to enhance my ethics day to day in all of life. And to me, it's been very helpful. I figured that this or AI ethics were kind of not just going on ancient principles of, philosophy, or like I know you said your co-author, his degree was in divinity, right? And poli-sci, like I kind of took it as cybersecurity people, the good-hearted ones, the ethical ones, were a faster, more intense road to understanding something I really wanted more information on.
Well, it's fascinating insights, Mandy. It's almost like you're using us as the benchmark or the example for how to deal with ethics because we get in these ethical dilemmas, perhaps more so than or just as much as a lot of other professions, right? Ed is,
Like canaries,
Yeah.
we're exposed to that toxic gas first, and do we succumb or somehow survive it? It's true, and I was brought on board for this book as a co-author because of my technical background, my background with the students. But you know, when Mandy said what she was saying, I was thinking that's great as long as you align yourself with carefully chosen people in this industry.
Yeah.
Because you're right, this industry does get exposed to that first. And we have such a great wellspring of really good people in this industry that you can learn from. And we also have some great examples of people who have like really botched things badly. So, but one of the big themes of the book is choosing a mentor. And we give some tips and ideas of how to choose a good mentor, to run ideas by, to bounce things off of, characteristics of a good mentor. That I think helps a lot. I know it's helped me. And we even talk in the book about our mentors. Paul talks about his and I talk about mine. So Mandy, what you said there is, I think, spot on. This industry is really interesting with respect to the ethical dilemmas that we face, and learning lessons from them, both positive and seeing where things went sideways or badly, is a great source of learning too.
It is the most common ethical dilemma, based on your interaction with students and my interaction with listeners and those in the community. I would say that people that come to me and say, I work for a company, and they don't want to put what in their belief is the appropriate resources into cybersecurity. And then as they dig into the company, they're like, some things are like kind of dotted line in cybersecurity, like they're not protecting the privacy of users, right? And as cybersecurity professionals, we tend to we hone in on that because that's our world, right? And we're like, wait, this is not right. How do I deal with that? I think that's probably the most popular question, right?
It comes up all the time. And it might be that, hey, they're ignoring my points of security being very weak in this organization, or they're not investing enough, or they just laid off the whole security team. So how are we going to be secure? I get that a lot. People asking me that question. But I don't jump in with the assumption that, hey, the cybersecurity practitioner is always right. I mean, sometimes they're wrong. So, I'll have this interactive back and forth, but I always tell them, please don't violate your non-disclosure agreements. You shouldn't be telling me stuff you're not supposed to be telling me. So let's talk hypothetically. That's why a mentor can be so helpful, to go through that stuff, because I do find sometimes these organizations are doing egregious things. I mean, just really terrible things. And they need to be called out. But, can you do that within the organization? Well, my manager won't listen to me. Well, is there anybody else in the management team? Or maybe your organization has a legal team that you can reach out to, or maybe some sort of internal hotline. Maybe it's HR that you reach out to. And then sometimes they'll tell me that they've exhausted all of that. And I say, okay, well, how far do you want to push this? Are you willing to lose your job over this? Sometimes it does get to that, but usually we're able to find something internal to the organization. But organizational malfeasance, or at least the perception of that by cybersecurity practitioners, is one of the biggest things that comes out.
Yeah, for sure. And almost there's an ethical dilemma when you want to leave the company. Like you said, you'll speak to people that have exhausted all options, right? We mentor them, and then they go, well, I have to leave. But a lot of times when I see people in that situation, or if I've been in that situation, I feel bad leaving because I'm just leaving that problem. And the ones that are going to suffer are their customers or their students or whoever's relying on that organization to provide some level of privacy and or security.
It's that meme of the little girl and the building on fire behind her. Mm-hmm. And she's happy to be outside of there, but she's also kind of happy to watch it burn. You don't want to be that little girl. Although sometimes you feel like joy in that, but
You know what's funny? I read an article about that meme, and apparently it was a controlled burn fire, and the fire department was training. And that's why she was smiling, because no one was in danger. It was a controlled burn kind of thing. Good. And that's why she was smiling. So
yeah. But it does feel like that, right? When you leave an organization under a cloud or under a flame, right? Yeah.
I had two sort of questions. One is, I was thinking about the topic of moral compass. I was flashing back when I was first doing system administration, had root on Unix systems. You could see freaking everything, right?
Yeah.
And being able to look at other people's email was creepy. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the moral compass going, knock, knock. And I'm thinking, have has that come up? But people are just like, they don't have a moral compass or whatever. Is it
that? So the book implicitly assumes that people have some sort of moral compass. But that said, people have different measures of this, and it's tuned slightly different. So the book doesn't lean too heavily on that. It has these 8 principles up front, and it talks about why these principles are important, and talks about adhering to these principles. And we hope your internal compass aligns with them or can be aligned to them. But we don't say in the book, hey, check your gut here. We instead say privacy is really important. How is this related to privacy? And think through the implications of what you're about to do. But we purposely stayed away from the, hey, follow your gut, follow your dreams, because we didn't know where that would turn out,
Yeah, because not everybody's going to have the right response the same way. And it makes perfect sense.
And we understood that, going in.
Yeah. So the other thing, and I've been having in another context, a bit of a conversation about the ethics complaints versus whistleblowing, right? Because typically the main difference is one's anonymous and the other is not. Face your accuser. Did that come up in your conversations as you're putting this together, or is that just totally out of the?
No, it did come up. It came up. I mean, given the origin of the book and given a lot of the stuff that's happened in the industry, the book counsels, hey, whistleblowing has to all adhere to the ethical principles that the book manifests, as does any sort of anonymous disclosure as well. They both need to be put through an ethical framework and carefully considered under the same conditions, whether it's official whistleblowing according to the law, or just even internal political discussions and interactions. So I mean, both are important, and the book does touch on both, and again leans heavily on a wise mentor or mentors that can help you through such difficulties.
Well, I think in 2024 we can't say we don't have whistleblowing.
Oh yeah, we sure do.
Yeah, and the law is interesting interaction between the law and ethics, right? Because the law is the law; it's not necessarily an ethical guide, right?
Right.
So
yes.
the relationship there is, and I'm thinking of also times where many of us, right, have been in that situation where by law we're obligated to report inappropriate materials. I don't remember what the better term for that is, right? Exactly. So. And I wasn't aware of that. I had to rely on mentors to tell me how to deal with that from a legal perspective, right? And then there's also an ethical perspective, like, well, how far do I go dig? How do I report it? Who do I? If it's someone that I know, there's a lot of consideration there for inappropriate material in general, right?
And I've had to advise many students on that over the years,
Mm-hmm.
that have called me saying, hey, guess what I found on my system? And what do I do, on one of the machines in my organization?
Yeah.
And the book is also very much informed by discussions with my friends in the industry. Josh Wright has done a lot. Josh Wright is a friend of the show.
Yeah.
A friend of mine. He's worked with me for 15 plus years. SANS instructor, lead author of the 504 course now. He and I had a lot of discussions in putting the book together. And one of the big things was the difference between legal and ethical. And sometimes they align, and that's great. And sometimes they don't, and you still want to follow the law, of course. So we talked a lot about that. So this was informed by discussions with Josh, discussions with a lawyer that I've worked with for many, many years, Mark Rash. I think have you had Mark on the show ever?
I don't think so.
Well, he was the chief prosecutor of Kevin Mitnick back in the day when he was at the DOJ. He had a lot to do with the creation. Yeah, it's very interesting. He's a fascinating guy, very funny. I think he'd be great on the show.
Yeah,
but he and I have been debating ethics stuff, me and my lawyer, for 20 years. We don't always see eye to eye. I disagree with him on some things.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. But
I've been in similar situations and we've had these discussions over the years. Yeah. And you go and your mentor should be giving you advice. If you're going to do something, have an attorney, right? And we run things by the attorneys. And the attorneys, I think, if I were to classify in general, err on the side of caution. And you're like, no, I really think I can do that. I really don't think this is a violation of the law. I really want to do this. And they're like, maybe not.
I got a great Mark Rash story on that one. So Josh Wright and I went to buy an Enigma machine about 12 years ago.
Yep.
And the guy who sold me the Enigma machine offered to sell me a human brain that he had. He used to be a professor of neuroscience and such. You've heard the story.
Yeah.
So I'm driving home from that, and I call Mark Rash, my lawyer. hey, Mark, something came up. And Mark stopped me and said, Ed, you got to, whenever you're a lawyer and, one of your clients calls and says something came up, you just love this because it means money. It's just money, right? He said, what's going on, Ed? What's going on? And I said, a man just offered to sell me a human brain. Could I get in trouble for that? And Mark's answer was, did you buy it? And I said, no. He said, you're fine. You're totally fine.
But what if you had? Though?
I didn't ask him. But
inquiring minds want to know, including the brain wants to know.
Right. It's good to have a good lawyer, though, I suppose.
So along those lines, I was thinking about in my course at Lawrence Livermore, I've had the fortune of working with our legal team on various issues. Like we chatted a lot with CCPA and GDPR. But over time, we've got a great relationship, and I can ask them a bonehead question without penalty because we know each other. And I'm thinking, is this unusual? Do you have access to? Do most people have access to their corporate legal team for guidance, or should they in fact engage a separate person so they don't run afoul of the company lawyers?
Here's my thought on that. I think people have more access to their company lawyers than they think they do. Because most people just would never think of going to them, right?
Or afraid or scared or nervous or whatever.
Right, exactly.
That's the question. Yeah.
But that said, they're often, look, their primary job is to protect the company, not you. But if there's something the company's doing that could hurt the company and or its customers and its reputation, I mean, it's their job to kind of deal with that, hopefully deftly and appropriately. So reaching out to the legal team, sometimes you got to do that. Reaching out to HR, sometimes you got to do that. But I think the mentor is the one that you know personally and can help guide you into whether it's time to call the lawyer, whether it's time to call HR or not. But I mean, you're within your rights and reasonableness to reach out to them directly. That said, it's usually nice to have a sympathetic ear to bounce ideas off of. And I've played that sympathetic ear, that mentor for, many people over the years. And I like to do it. I really do.
And you're right. That key point about whose position they're defending, you really have to understand that. The difference between employee relations and staff relations is that key point. But yeah, like I said, I figure I've been very fortunate. I've known that legal team for a long time, and we've talked about all kinds of stuff just to make sure we're on the same page. And it's great. And they call me with questions too. It's fine.
I've known Mark Rash so long. I remember when he walked into my office one morning a long time ago, he said, Ed, you got to stop using Alta Vista. There's this new search engine called Google. It's amazing. Mark Rash first told me about Google.
I think a lot of us remember that moment when one of our peers was like, hey, you got to check out this thing called Google, right?
For me, that was Mark Rash. How about that?
Yeah. Hot damn.
A vulnerability disclosure is very messy. I feel like we could probably write a book just about vulnerability disclosure. In fact, there probably are books.
I'm sure there are, yeah. And we do touch on it in this book. It's one of the themes. Yeah.
It's such a messy process, and every situation seems to be somewhat unique.
Yeah.
But that is likely an ethical, moral dilemma that you may not be the prime person, but you may be involved with in some capacity. And
I have had people come to me. They found a big vulnerability. The vendor's blown them off. And they come to me and say, hey, this vendor's not giving me the time of day. What do you think? And sometimes I don't think the vuln's that big of a deal. I don't think it's as big of a deal as they think it is. So I tell them that. Other times it's like, wow, this is a big deal. That vendor, should do something. Do you want me to act as your disclosure proxy on that? And I have reached out to some vendors. And because of my history with SANS, I'll often reach out to the vendor, say, hey, you might not know who I am, but there's this vulnerability that I think you should really look at. And rather often they say, oh, Ed, I took your class 15 years ago, And so then there's this a relationship.
There's a rapport,
there.
There's a trust, implied trust relationship.
And I'm happy to do that to kind of help, as appropriate and to move things forward. I've done that many, many times. I rather enjoy it, actually. It's kind of cool. But, there's always this worry that they're going to come after me. And it's like, look, I'm sorry. And whenever somebody says I can be their proxy for disclosure, I always say, look, I'm not going to jail for you. And if they push me hard enough, I will tell them who you are. Just so you know. I will try to maintain your anonymity. But if they squeeze me, I'm calling Mark Rash. And if he says, you might as well just tell him, I'm going to tell him. Just so you know. So, that's happened before several times where there's some really sticky situations associated with critical infrastructure. And so people have found vulnerabilities and come to me saying, hey, this looks really scary. And, I've emailed some friends at DHS and said, or CISA, and said, hey, can you take a look at this, because this looks bad. So yeah, that's important stuff. Another thing I think it's worth pointing out in the book, this focuses on civilian cybersecurity ethics, meaning civilian government, meaning commercial. It does not touch on the military, because the book would be more than twice as long, because there's so many other things that come up in that. So this is maybe volume 2, although I don't know if I have enough expertise. I do, a fair amount of work in military circles, but that's a whole bigger and more complicated area when it comes to the ethics of military action and nation state level activities. So again, this is civilian. I do think our military friends might find it interesting to read, but it is civilian centric.
Yeah, that's an important point, because it is very, very different in a vast and broad topic that extends beyond cybersecurity, but often incorporates it in today's modern warfare, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It sure does. Yep.
I'm curious, can you give kind of an agnostic overview from your years of working with students? What can you say, like a percentage of where you go, yeah, in general, they have a decent set point where it comes to ethics?
Oh, I think so. Now, there's sampling bias. These are people who are taking a class. They're so interested in the field. They probably have kind of a high sense of trying to make the world a better place, so that they're taking the class. But generally speaking, it's almost always favorable, and they seem like very good people that have sat in my class. Now, that also could be my own sunny optimism as well. So I'm saying there's all kinds of sampling biases and filters through which I peer, but generally speaking, these are good people who want to do the right thing, and they need to be equipped with a framework to help with that. That's what I tend to see. Yeah, there's sociopaths. There's people that are like, oh my goodness, what's going on? But you get to know the people, and they tend to. I mean, I don't want to say it's universal, but it's really high percentages want to do the right thing. But sometimes it's hard to know what the right thing is. I mean, look, Larry is one of my closest friends. And no, I'm teasing you, Larry. He is one of my closest friends. But Larry's got a heart of gold. He really does.
Oh, see, I was wondering where you were going to go with that, Ed. So thank you.
Yeah. I will attest to
We're
that.
all guessing.
Thank you for not keeping our audience guessing where you were going. I appreciate that. Appreciate that.
Wow.
Well, if people didn't know Larry, they might think, gosh, that guy, look at him. He's all got the tattoos and this and the piercings and all that. But he's the sweetest man you'll ever meet,
Like that. That's exactly what my mom used to say. She would tell me as when I got older that, hey, if I ran into you in a dark alley somewhere, I'd run the other way because the way you look. But yeah, don't judge a book by its cover.
You're awesome, Larry. You're awesome.
Yes. I still remember how Mike Poor introduced Larry to me. He's pointing one arm, look, he's evil, and tells on the other arm, look, he's good.
He's the balance.
Yes.
He's the balance of the force.
Yes. So, Ed, I mean, question for the book and to help some of our listeners maybe start to delve into some of the content. What's your favorite case study out of the book, without giving us too much away? That
is a good question. I mean, they're all directly based on either questions I've gotten from students or my own work. I do expert witness in breaches, and I've been doing that for 22 years now. I've worked on most of the big breach cases, the commercial big breach cases. At any given time, I'm working on 2 or 3 of them as an expert witness. I would say now they're all generic. All the cases here, if you read them and the history of the industry, you could probably say this sounds an awful lot like that breach, or this sounds an awful lot like that vulnerability. But we've given them a generic gloss so they could be sort of universally applicable and sort of timeless. If you read about something that's ethically important today, but it was from 2015, you'll say, well, that's 2015. That doesn't matter anymore. Of course it does. It still does, because the ethical principle applies. That said, my favorite stuff, the case studies that we cover, are the breach cases, and whether to disclose that publicly, mix in some ransomware into some of them, and it becomes really interesting. They're ethically fraught with all kinds of things. They're dynamic kinds of cases, because you might think this is the right ethical thing, and then the attacker sends another email saying, well, we managed to get all the data, we're going to start leaking it, or they actually do start leaking it. Does that change your ethical calculus? So I think the breach cases are my favorite. My heart, though, is in the vulnerability disclosure ones because, I've been a pen tester and a hacker for so many years. That's kind of where my heart is, but my favorite ones, because I have just the most in-depth knowledge, are the breach cases, often with associated ransomware.
Yeah, because there's that debate: do we pay the ransom or do we not?
That's right. That's the fundamental. But then, even then, do we tell people that we did?
Right.
Do we have to tell
what
people?
Do we tell
that we
people?
did?
How much do we tell people?
Right. All of that. And there's a couple of case studies associated with that. And they're interesting. And there's also ones, like Paul, you were saying earlier, where somebody sees something on the network or a file share that they shouldn't have seen, but it has a material impact on some of their closest friends, like layoffs. What do you say? Maybe, in fact, the scenario in the book is there's a friend who's about to close on a house, got a baby due coming up, and you just saw a file in the normal course of your work. You weren't snooping around, but you saw a file with, upcoming layoffs, and that person's name was in it. What do you do? What do you do? So, so there's a lot of case studies like that, but the breaches are probably my favorite because of all the nuances in them, and then the vuln disclosure cases.
It's interesting in both the scenarios you describe in breach disclosure and vulnerability disclosure. I think the important point is to have some empathy.
Yeah.
Because there are multiple parties involved. Those parties have different incentives and different viewpoints that you have to really understand where they're coming from in order to be successful. And it's not always going to work out, was the other thing you got to know, right? It's not going to always be, pan out the way that you envisioned or want it to. But understanding where everyone else is coming from, that empathy aspect is important. And I find today in vulnerability disclosure that I'm involved with, I'm now typically the one going, well, wait, we need to back up because this party who's involved, like, they don't have the right information. They need to have that information because look at it from their perspective. If they don't, we could be disclosing something and it could hurt them. It could hurt their reputation or hurt their customers, right?
And I think you can see why our first two principles are: I will treat all people with dignity and respect. Number two, I will seek the best interest of others.
Right. That's right. Yes,
broadly
that
defined.
Is the key point. Yep.
Yeah. So, and some people look at these 8 principles that we have and say, well, they're fine principles. That's good. I understand why they're in that order. The number one is the one that you follow the most carefully and all the way down. But that applies to just being a good human being. Right? It could apply to other fields. That's not a weakness of the book. That's a strength of the book. Here is a set of ethical principles, and then how cybersecurity practitioners can follow them and adhere to them and think through them. I think that's a really good thing, so that it's not just some stuff that applies to cybersecurity where it's very narrowed by the current technological landscape. Here's the cybersecurity ethics of this kind of thing. You get access to a file share or you find a vulnerability. Instead, let's take a clear ethical framework and then apply cybersecurity thought to that. That was the genesis. It's
interesting with attorneys that we've had on the show. We'll often have this discussion, oftentimes in the cybersecurity realm, I came across this thing, right? Like it was on the internet and it was somewhat difficult to find, but basically it was public, right? And I try and paint a scenario in the real world. What would that be like if I just came across a big bag of money somewhere? Like what's my moral, legal, and ethical obligation there? Because maybe I came across a data breach or leak of some data, right? Like that's often the conversations I'll have with legal teams is, we got this. Now what do we do, right? And we want to do the right thing. We want to do good by it. But if I found it, someone else could, right?
Mark Rash and I often talk about how can we analogize these things to, physical, real world kind of stuff. Because that's super helpful when you're talking to judges or juries or what have you, if things go to court. So and that is helpful. I used to talk about that when I taught the 504 class for SANS years ago, is to try to come up with physical analogies of the virtual things we're dealing with here. Yeah. Good.
You mentioned the ethics framework and context that you're covering in the book, and I'm wondering, beyond an ethics policy, is there enough supporting stuff in the business? Like when you come across that information about the pregnant people who's on the layoff list, or you come across information you shouldn't be handling, but it's not where it's supposed to be, like on the internet. Is there enough guidance for folks out there in just the ethics policies, or should we have supporting information as well to say, hey,
I think an enterprise needs an infrastructure to be able to support that. Yes, an ethics policy ethical use of computing resources in your organization. You should definitely have that. And the book talks about that and has some pointers to them. But also, it's not going to be comprehensive. So you need somebody to talk to within your organization. There should be, maybe an organization, depending on how big you are. If your organization's really big, you have an organization within it to do that, or at least some person that people can turn to. Maybe that person's in HR, but somebody to go to for, I don't want to say whistleblower, that's too strong, but just for advice. And, this is often, Lee, I'm sure you know this. This is often the case in large government contracting organizations because it's mandated, right? It's part of the contract or part of the legal framework that they operate in. In commercial organizations, it varies. But it's something that you see a lot in, say, military contractors or even civilian government contractors.
It occurs to me in a world of ransomware breaches, the extortionware branch of that companies should have some guidance on. You find our most sensitive documents online. Tell us, but don't post it on social media. Or something.
Yeah. Reach out directly. Maintain anonymity where you can, and the privacy of the sensitivity of it. Absolutely. Yeah. These things, we're talking about them here, and they sound hard, and they are. But it's important, number one, and it can be just fascinating and even kind of fun to tease your way through this. Look, it's not fun when you're getting ransomware. I get that. But beforehand and thinking through it and what you could do, every chapter in the book, I'm not trained to actually hold the book up every time I mention it. This is just happening naturally, just so you know. But every chapter in the book ends with a specific example of a case, and then a bunch of questions associated with that case. So you can talk through it with maybe a classroom environment or your peers or your friends or your mentor. So every chapter ends with that. And of course, the chapter is organized around one of these 8 principles. The thing that gets really interesting, and the case study at the end is associated with the principle that is most dominant for that chapter, of course. That said, what gets really interesting is when the principles collide with each other. It's like, well, do I exercise the best interests of others, or do I take ownership of my mistakes? Should I emphasize treating people with dignity and respect, or the privacy of others? And several of the case studies, they conflict. And it's like, well, how do you resolve that conflict? And we've got a section in the book on that. But that's where it gets interesting and kind of fun.
I think there's scenarios in these range, and I'm sure all of us have probably experienced when someone in your friends or family circle comes to you and says, like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you just hack that and make it right?
Yeah.
And that could be, I'm struggling with a school website and I'm waiting for my password to be reset. And like, can't you just hack in? And we have to be trained and we have to mentor others to be like, the answer is no, but you may need to explain why, right? Like laws, ethics, morals to that person who's just like, oh, just help me with my problem. But that can get dicey when someone is being harassed or those types of situations. Hey, can you help with that, right? And those are, again, every situation is different. And I love the book and the way you've positioned it, Ed, to guide us in making the right decisions in those situations. Not telling us what to do, but giving us the information to make those decisions and perhaps explain it to people better. Be like, no, I can't hack the school website. That's a violation of the CFAA, right?
Well,
I mean, can I help you find this?
And to clarify,
ahead,
Paul, you probably can hack the school website.
We could, yes.
But the answer is I should not.
Should not.
We've all seen the War Games movie. We've all seen the War Games movie. And how often have you thought back to that password that's pencil? Remember, he gets in and changes the grades. It's like, you can't do that. Sometimes I'll see a website. Maybe just yesterday I saw a website and look, I couldn't get the website using the UI to do what I wanted it to do. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'll bet you I could get it to do what I wanted it to do if I just tweaked a few things. No, it's not worth it. Yeah. I did call them though, and I said, hey, your website's broken. So
right. And that's the guidance we want to send to people that we're mentoring, right? Is to make those right decisions. But how do we handle the being abused in law enforcement won't help me? I've got a lot of those situations.
That's a hard one. And, and it's, there's many sides to every story like that. And it can also be very dangerous too, to intervene on that. Yeah. So I give my best advice that I can to someone like that, maybe referring them to organizations that are more attuned to helping with the very sensitive nature of that.
Yep.
than just a technological approach to just hacking or, doing OSINT for them on the, the malefactor, say. Mandy, did you have something? I thought your hand was up.
Go ahead, Mandy.
I did. So I'm just curious, how much credence do you give to using the cybersecurity code in instances where, like, an individual researcher or a SOC analyst or maybe a penetration tester that's engaging with a client are just completely miffed with the executives or the other sides that don't understand what they are trying to do?
Yeah, that comes up a lot in the book. We talk about that kind of thing across all those different job fields very much. And, the book talks about finding common ground with them. I will often say this as a penetration tester. Sometimes, I go into an organizational context. We found some major vulnerabilities, or the customer doesn't agree with us on the sensitivity of the finding. High risk versus medium risk happens a lot. And, I'll go in and I start out by saying we both have the same goal. The goal is for your organization to be more secure. And in the smoothest way we can get there. So let's talk about why we think what we think and why you think what you think, and we'll come to some meeting of the minds. So, but sometimes that doesn't work, but at least that's the attempt. You try to have that. We have the same goal fundamentally. How can we get there in a reasonable fashion? I see Lee is wiggling his finger, but
So I'm thinking about the journey you took to create the book, which is really your intended. It could be used to teach a course, and I know once, maybe twice in your career, you've created some courseware for this upcoming security,
Yes.
and I wondered how the two contrasted. Which did you like better, and how? Or I know they're different.
I do love course development. That is fun. But, maybe focusing on the similarities first is worthwhile. One of the things that I really love to do when creating a course, like for SANS or what have you, is to think about really hard ideas and to try to boil them down to what is the fundamental thing here, to strip out all the complicating stuff and say, what is the foundational idea here? And then how can we start attaching things to it to build it back up into the real world thing? Cross-site request forgery. Well, fundamentally, if you boil all that down, what is that? And then, then let's build the context around it. Okay, it turns out the book is a similar kind of thing. All these complex ethical dilemmas, how can we shave that down to the core of what the problem is and the thing that makes this hard, explain that in a simple fashion, and then build on top of it. So that is the commonality. The difference is in the technology stuff and writing the technology stuff, either the tech works or it doesn't work. Here you've got the people factor and sensitivities, and it's just a harder minefield to walk through. It's an important minefield, though. I mean, fundamentally, that's the most important minefield. So I would say it's probably more enjoyable to write the technical class than to do the ethics stuff, because you got but it's probably more important to do the ethics stuff, to be honest.
Ed, anything else you want to share with our audience about the book, or tease anything you got coming up?
I do hope people find it interesting, fun, and useful. Also, Holiday Hack Challenge this year. I want people to know we are launching a month early, and I think you're going to have me on the show shortly after launch. We're going to launch November 7th. It's 1 month early than normal because we want to give people more time to do it. We're also going to do a phased launch where we're going to do a prologue on November 7th. We're going to do Act 1 on November 11th. We'll do Act 2 on November 18th. We're taking U.S. Thanksgiving week, no new content. That's the week of November 25th. And then December 2nd will be Act 3. So we're trying all these different fun things there. There's going to be a scoreboard this year. Mm-hmm. There's going to be cohorts. So you could have like a Pulse Security weekly cohort of just you and your friends playing, and you'll have your own little scoreboard. There'll be the big scoreboard for everybody, and then your own scoreboard. So there's a lot of great new stuff launching November 7th. You can register now for it. It's at sans.org/holidayhack.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to have the conversation with you about all the aspects of Holiday Hack Challenge, but specifically how you're using AI in LLMs. Because when we spoke last year, you were using that. And to think about all of us collectively and those listening, how that landscape has changed and evolved in a year, I think is going to be a great discussion. I'm looking forward to it.
Tooling has totally changed. So I'm looking forward to being on that show probably second week in November, right after launch.
Sweet. Well, Ed, thank you very much for appearing on Pulse Security Weekly. As always, it's wonderful having you on the show. I encourage everyone to go check out the book. There's a link in the show notes where you can buy it. Ed, thanks again.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, folks.
With that, we'll take a short break and come back with the security news. Stay tuned.